I remember the exact moment she said it, though it wasn't dramatic. No grand gesture, no cinematic pause, just the kind of quiet that presses against your chest until you can barely breathe. She was leaning against the counter at the bookstore where I worked, one hand tracing the spine of a worn poetry collection, her eyes flicking up to mine like a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I was 24, barely keeping up with life, and she was everything I wasn't. She carried herself with a calm I envied, like she knew which parts of the world deserved attention and which didn't. Her hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, the kind of careless elegance you don't notice until you've spent too long watching. Mid-40s, they said, but I didn't care about numbers. Age meant nothing when someone looked at a book as if it held all the secrets of the universe. I guess that means I should be careful, I said, fumbling with the hem of my sleeve. Her smile was small, ironic, but not unkind. She tilted her head, just a fraction, and something in the corner of her eyes softened, like she knew I was trying to sound clever and failing miserably. Careful, she echoed, voice low, smooth, the kind that makes ordinary words feel like confessions. I nodded before I could stop myself. My fingers drummed against the counter, an impatient, nervous rhythm, but she didn't look away. She never did. And just like that, the air between us changed. A quiet kind of electricity, unspoken, hovering like a candle's flame in a dark room. The bookstore smelled like old paper and coffee, the fluorescent lights too bright for comfort but perfect for noticing her. I watched as she reached for a notebook, her fingers brushing the edge of mine for the briefest second. It wasn't much, too small to matter to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. My heart stuttered like it had its own agenda. She laughed softly at something I hadn't even said, tilting back into a confidence that made me feel both invisible and exposed at the same time. I wanted to ask her why she came here every Thursday, why she read the same lines over and over, but my mouth felt like it had forgotten how to speak. So I stayed quiet, letting her presence do the talking. For a moment, the world outside the bookstore didn't exist. The bell above the door jingled. Someone left a stack of returned novels, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear like it was the most casual thing in the world. But I noticed. I always noticed. Then she said it. "You'll break my heart," she said, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to slice through every thought I had of staying calm. She said it like she meant it, and I knew that she didn't say things lightly. And I replied, because my chest had been holding this truth like a secret too stubborn to keep, only to keep it with me. She blinked. Just a flicker. No words. Just that pause where the air grew heavy, and I felt like the entire universe had shrunk to the space between us. I wanted to laugh, wanted to apologize, wanted to disappear, but all I could do was watch her. Watch how she folded her hands over the notebook, how her lips pressed together in a fraction of a smile, like she was weighing the danger and the curiosity in me at the same time. I walked back to the counter pretending to organize books, but my mind wasn't on anything else. Not the titles, not the returns, not the sound of traffic outside. I kept thinking about that pause, that moment where she had said more in silence than words could ever carry. And I knew, already, that I wouldn't be able to forget it. Her glance had settled in my chest, like a bookmark I wasn't allowed to remove. I saw her again that Thursday, the kind of Thursday that drags your feet but somehow feels heavier when she's around. She was perched in the corner of the bookstore, the same notebook open in front of her, but this time her pen hovered above the page like she was waiting for someone, or something, to give her permission to write. I was supposed to be shelving returns, but I couldn't stop glancing at her. She looked smaller somehow, hunched over the notebook, shoulders tight. There was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A line I hadn't noticed the first time curved near her mouth when she tried to smile at a customer. I wondered, briefly, what had pulled her down today. "Need a hand?" I asked, approaching with more confidence than I felt. She lifted her gaze slowly, a flicker of surprise passing over her features. Okay," she said, voice clipped, almost rehearsed. And yet, her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the stack of books beside her. I crouched down to straighten a fallen row of paperbacks. "I mean, If you want me to. I trailed off, realizing she didn't even need help, but my offer lingered like an unspoken invitation. She let a small laugh escape, a quiet, uneven sound, like a sigh trying to pass itself off as humor. "You're very helpful," she said. Not a compliment, not really. More like an observation wrapped in caution. I noticed everything. The faint scar along her knuckle from a careless coffee spill. How she bit the inside of her lip when she thought no one was looking. The faint scent of jasmine from her hair, subtle but grounding, like it anchored the air around her. I felt a twinge of something I couldn't name. Concern, maybe, or the pull of wanting to see her unguarded, even for a second. "Long day?" I asked gently. Her eyes darted toward the window and back, avoiding mine. "You could say that," she murmured. Her shoulders sagged slightly, almost imperceptibly, like she had carried something heavy for too long. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering longer than necessary, and for a moment, the wall she always kept around herself wavered. I said nothing. I just watched, waiting for a crack in that careful composure, for a hint that she needed, something more than polite distance. A customer passed by, and she straightened instantly, her guard snapping back into place. But before she turned, our eyes met for the briefest heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, I caught a trace of vulnerability she hadn't intended to show. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an invitation. It was just her, raw for a fraction of a second, and it burned into my chest. Then she was upright, closed her notebook with careful precision, and muttered something about needing more tea. She started to walk away, and I followed just a step behind, feeling the quiet tug between us, a gentle, forbidden energy I couldn't, and didn't want to, ignore. Her hand brushed mine when she reached for the doorknob. Not deliberately, not playfully, just there. And I froze. She didn't look back. I didn't move. And yet, in that almost touch, the space between us screamed louder than any words could. I stayed still long after she left, smelling the faint jasmine lingering in the air, thinking about her laugh, her tired eyes, her hands, and how I already wanted to notice all of it again. It was late, the bookstore nearly empty, rain tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I was restocking a shelf near the poetry section when I felt her presence behind me, soft and deliberate, like she belonged there, but didn't quite allow herself to stay. "I couldn't sleep," she said, voice low, almost drowned by the rain. She leaned against the counter, notebook in hand, and for a moment the fluorescent light painted her in soft gold, shadows pooling where her hair curled around her face. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but my throat went dry. We moved closer in silence, an unspoken rhythm forming between us. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something woody, grounded, and my chest constricted in a way I hadn't expected. "You're always here late," I said finally, trying to sound casual. My fingers grazed the edge of a shelf as I spoke, deliberately avoiding the space between us. She tilted her head, studying me like she could see every thought I was pretending to hide. "I like the quiet," she murmured, tapping her pen against the notebook. "Fewer people, less noise." There it was, the vulnerability. She didn't say more, didn't explain why. She didn't have to. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand, the way her shoulders dipped when she exhaled. And in that silence, the world shrank, leaving just us and the storm outside. I wanted to reach out, to brush a strand of damp hair from her face or just hold the space she had carved out for herself in the dim light. But a phone buzzed across the counter, her ringtone. She glanced down, and the brief flicker of something tense crossed her expression. She muttered a quick, "Excuse me," and answered. I froze, watching her lean against the counter, her voice hushed and clipped. I caught only fragments. "Just wanted to check." I said, "I'm fine. I'll handle it." Then the line went dead. Whatever it was, she carried it like another weight in her hands, but she forced her posture back upright, notebook closed with quiet precision. I swallowed and looked down at the shelf, pretending to organize books, but I felt the electricity of what could have been buzzing between us. Close enough to touch, close enough to say something I'd regret, or that I wanted to. I should go, she said softly, shifting her bag onto her shoulder. My stomach twisted, every instinct screaming at me not to let her walk out of that door. But she gave no invitation, no hesitation, only that careful, deliberate calm she always wore like armor. I followed her with my eyes, heart hammering, fingers twitching like they wanted to bridge the distance. And then it happened, almost. My hand brushed hers as she reached for the doorknob. Not a deliberate touch, not even a spark meant to ignite. But enough. Enough to make my chest constrict, my pulse spike, enough to make me realize I couldn't pretend I wasn't thinking about her constantly. She stepped outside, rain dripping from the edge of her coat, leaving me frozen inside with the echo of her presence, the near touch still humming in my veins. I stayed behind the counter long after she left, replaying the moment again and again, the quiet, the storm, the brush of her hand, and wondering how close I could get without everything breaking. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening with streetlight reflections. Inside the bookstore, the air smelled faintly of wet paper and the coffee someone had left on the counter hours ago. She was sitting on the low window ledge, notebook closed, knees pulled close to her chest. I hesitated before coming closer, unsure whether to break the fragile spell or let it hang. "Do you ever feel like," she started, voice soft, uncertain, "like nothing we do matters outside this room?" I blinked. Nothing I could have expected would have prepared me for that. I crouched down, pretending to adjust the books on the lower shelf, but I was entirely focused on her. Her hands rested lightly on her knees, fingers tapping once, twice, then stopping as if afraid of making too much noise. "I mean us," she continued, voice catching on the last word. "I keep thinking, are we just pretending?" The quiet between us was thick, almost painful. I wanted to answer, to reach out, to say anything that might make it less terrifying, but my throat felt raw. I could only watch her, the way her eyes darted to the street, to the floor, then back to me, as though measuring how much truth she could risk showing. I don't even know what this is," she admitted finally, voice trembling despite herself. She pulled her knees closer, tilting her head down just slightly. The vulnerability in that gesture, something raw, unpolished, hit me harder than any confession could. I swallowed and stayed quiet. Words felt dangerous. Any sound I made might shatter the delicate tension she had let slip. Instead, I let the silence speak, letting my eyes linger on the slight quiver in her lips, the way her fingers flexed and released like they couldn't decide whether to stay still or reach for something. She exhaled sharply, then laughed, a brittle, almost embarrassed sound. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't. Don't apologize," I said quietly. My voice was barely more than a whisper, but it felt like a lifeline. "I've been thinking the same thing." Her gaze met mine then, fully, unguarded. Not a flirt, not a dare, just someone daring to be honest with herself, with me. And I realized in that moment that whatever this was, whatever line we had been walking, it was changing. We could no longer pretend that every glance, every brush of hands, was just coincidence. We didn't speak for a long while. I watched her, trying to memorize the subtle curve of her shoulders, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the faint tension in her jaw. She seemed smaller somehow, stripped of the armor she always wore, and I wanted to tell her that I saw it, that I saw her. But the words wouldn't come. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, "What if we can't go back after this?" The line hit me like ice water. I wanted to answer, to promise something I didn't yet understand, but instead I just nodded. Because the truth was already there, pulsing between us, undeniable. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if there even was a next step, but I did know that for the first time, silence had stopped being safe. And she, looking so human and fragile, had let me in enough to see it. It was quiet that evening, the store nearly empty, save for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. She was sitting cross-legged on the window ledge again, notebook open but untouched. I lingered nearby, pretending to sort the new arrivals, but I could feel the shift in the air, the subtle way she moved, slower than usual, like she was carrying something heavy inside. Finally, she spoke, voice low, hesitant. I haven't told anyone this in years, she said. Her fingers tapped lightly against the notebook, a rhythm that was almost a plea for me to listen. I lost someone. It wasn't sudden, but it felt endless. Like I was walking through a world that had already stopped for me, even though everyone else kept moving. I froze mid-sword, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I could feel her watching me, waiting for some flicker of recognition or understanding. I started, then paused, letting the quiet stretch, letting her words sink in. I think that's why I'm cautious, she admitted, looking down at her hands. Why I watch people, but don't always let them in. Because I've been broken before, in ways that leave you wondering if you'll ever be whole again. Her voice cracked, just slightly, like the shutter of a camera catching the last ray of sun. I stepped closer, careful not to close the space between us too quickly. My own chest felt tight, the familiar pull of wanting to reach out stronger than ever, but I resisted. You remind me, I said softly, of someone I lost too. Not the same person, not the same story, but the way you carry yourself, the small hesitations, it feels like the world left a mark on you. And maybe that's why I notice. Her eyes flicked up, surprise flashing across her face. She didn't speak, just stared, and in that look I saw the wall crack, a little. The notebook slipped from her hands and landed open on the ledge, a folded envelope tucked inside it. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she didn't care. I picked it up for her, fingers brushing hers as I handed it over. She hesitated, then slowly opened it. A photo fell out, a younger version of herself, laughing with someone whose absence now echoed in her eyes. The edges were worn, corners curled, and in that single image, everything she hadn't said became visible: grief, love, memory. She pressed the photo to her chest, eyes brimming but careful. I didn't think I'd ever show this to anyone, she whispered. And I realized, in that moment, that the world had shifted without warning. Something unspoken between us had moved, imperceptibly but irrevocably. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if I'd be strong enough to meet it, or if she even wanted me to. But I did know one thing. Whatever had held her inside for years, she had trusted me enough to let it spill, just a little. And that tiny, trembling act changed everything. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and clean. The bookstore smelled faintly of paper and the faint residue of coffee from earlier. She was sitting on the same window ledge where we'd shared so many silences, notebook closed, her coat draped loosely around her shoulders. I lingered by the shelves, pretending to straighten a row of books, though my eyes never left her. I keep thinking, she said quietly, almost to herself, that maybe I've been avoiding something real for too long. I took a careful step closer, letting the words sink in. The honesty wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confession wrapped in emotion. It was small, deliberate, the kind that carries weight precisely because it doesn't demand a response. I wanted to say something, anything, but instead I moved to sit on the floor beside her, leaving a few inches between us, giving space but signaling I was here. Her hand shifted slightly on the ledge, brushing the edge of mine. Not deliberately, not with intent, but enough. I didn't pull away. My fingers twitched, hovering just close enough to let her feel that presence without crossing her line. I'm tired, she admitted softly. Her eyes glanced toward mine, and I caught the vulnerability I had been waiting for months to see again. Tired of pretending nothing matters. Tired of pretending. I'm fine. I nodded, letting silence speak for me. No words could match the gravity of what we'd been circling for weeks. Not now, not here. She exhaled a long, measured breath and leaned slightly forward, letting the weight of her body tilt toward me. I could feel it subtly, the shift, the trust, the acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was inevitable. I didn't reach for her immediately. I didn't need to. Presence alone carried more meaning than any rush of words could. For a moment, all that existed was the quiet, the faint hum of the heater, the soft rustle of pages, the light tapping of rain still clinging to the windows outside. And in that shared space, the tension, the hesitation, and the longing collapsed gently into something that felt like understanding. My hand brushed hers again, lighter this time, lingering just a heartbeat longer. She didn't move, didn't pull away. Fingers adjusted, hands resting alongside each other, letting the contact exist without needing a name. Maybe, she whispered finally, almost like a thought she was afraid to finish. We don't have to pretend anymore. I didn't answer. I only nodded, because everything I could possibly say was already being said in the quiet understanding, in the simple brush of skin against skin, in the shared acknowledgement that neither of us would walk away. Not now, not ever from this. Time stretched, minutes folding into minutes, the world outside continuing without us. We sat like that, side by side, hands barely touching, sharing something unspoken but undeniably real. And for the first time in a long while, the weight in my chest settled. No declarations, no fireworks, no perfect moment captured. Just presence, just knowing. The world was still there outside the windows, but inside, in that fragile, earned space, everything had shifted. And that was enough. I'm sitting at the counter again, notebook open, but this time it feels different. The familiar smell of old books and brewed coffee no longer presses against me. It rests, easy and gentle, like the quiet aftermath of a storm. She's nearby, shelving a stack of returned novels, moving with that same calm precision I've come to notice, but there's something lighter in her step. I think back to that first Thursday, the day she told me, almost in passing, that I'd break her heart. I remember how I wanted to respond with clever words, and instead, I said what I truly felt, without knowing what it would unlock. That moment, fragile and awkward, set everything into motion. We didn't rush. There were silences I had to navigate, moments where her walls loomed higher than I could reach, days when I questioned my own patience, my own heart. And she, well, she taught me something about trust, about subtle honesty, about letting someone see the cracks without fearing they'd fall through them. I've learned that love isn't always firework moments or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it's a shared glance over coffee cups, a brush of hands while reaching for a book, the way she laughs quietly when she thinks no one's listening. It's messy, confusing, imperfect, and that's exactly why it sticks. She's changed too, I think. The guarded tilt in her shoulder has softened. Her smiles reach her eyes more often, and she lets herself linger in moments she might have once dismissed. She notices me noticing her, and for the first time, she allows the small intimacies without overthinking, without armor. And me? I've learned to slow down, to be patient with someone else's pace, to recognize that closeness doesn't always need to be claimed immediately, to understand that being present, really present, is sometimes the most radical act of love. We still don't say, "I love you," in grand gestures. We don't need to. Our days together are stitched from quiet awareness, from the knowledge that we are, without question, a safe place for each other. It's in the little things, sharing a glance in the middle of the aisles, brushing fingers over a book's spine, the way her hair catches the light in the morning. Some people might call it slow, some might call it unconventional, but for us, it's exactly right. It's the kind of love that doesn't scream but hums steadily, a melody that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I catch her laughing softly at a memory she's jotting down. Glance meets glance, and I feel it again. The quiet understanding that we've earned this, together. That what began with an almost truth, with hesitation and pause, has grown into a presence I can't imagine living without. And I know she feels it too, because sometimes, when she doesn't think I'm looking, she lets her fingers brush mine, just enough to say, "I'm here." And so are you. And that's enough. For anyone watching this, maybe take a moment to notice the small intimacies around you. The glances, the silences, the gentle touches. Sometimes, they carry the loudest meaning.